My daughter-in-law stole my life savings for her dream wedding and told everyone I had gifted it to her. My son just said, "Stop being selfish. Just be happy for us, Mom." So I showed up at the altar and gave her a wedding gift she'd never forget. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. My name is Deborah Pierce. For 40 years I was a NICU nurse, a keeper of secrets and a quiet warrior for the most fragile of lives. I believe that my life, like the savings I so carefully accumulated, was a testament to patience and care. This is the story of how my own son and his fiancée staged a hostile takeover of my life's work, and how I orchestrated a final, public and legally binding merger of justice and consequences. Now let me tell you my story. Retirement, I had discovered, was a quiet country. After 4 decades spent inside the relentless high-stakes ballet of a neonatal intensive care unit, the silence of my small Atlanta bungalow was a balm to my soul. The constant, urgent beeping of heart monitors and the hushed running whispers of doctors had been replaced by the gentle rhythmic hum of my old refrigerator, and the distant cheerful sound of children playing in the sun-drenched street outside. At 63, I was finally the master of my own time, a luxury so profound it felt almost sinful. The ghosts of my old life were never far, of course. Sometimes in the dead of night I would jolt awake, my heart pounding, my ears straining for the sound of an alarm that wasn't there. My hands, even in sleep, still remembered the precise, delicate motions of inserting a feeding tube into a vein no thicker than a thread. I had been a warrior, a guardian at the gates of life for the most fragile of souls. My life's work had been to fight against the odds, to coax life into being where there was only a flicker of a chance, and that fight had left its mark on me, a core of unshakable quiet steel beneath my soft grandmotherly exterior. My greatest source of pride, the tangible result of a lifetime of sacrifice, was not my small tidy garden or my well-stocked library. It was a small, leather-bound passbook that I kept in a lockbox in my closet. It represented my nest egg, a substantial 6-figure sum that I had built, dollar by painstaking dollar, over 4 decades of grueling 12-hour shifts, of missed holidays and sleepless nights, of brown bag lunches eaten standing up in a cramped break room. It was my security, my freedom, my long-planned ticket to a comfortable, worry-free old age. It was the tangible proof that my life of quiet, relentless sacrifice had been worth it. My only child, my son Andre, was the center of my universe. He was an elementary school teacher, a good, kind man who had, I thought, inherited his father's gentle spirit. But since he had met Monique, a change had come over him, a subtle, creeping corrosion of his character that I had tried very hard to ignore. He became more distant, our weekly phone calls becoming less frequent, more strained, and there was always the subject of money. He never asked for it directly, not at first. It was always a hint, a casual mention of a car repair he couldn't afford, of a credit card bill that was higher than expected. I always helped, of course. I would transfer a few $100s into his account, a gesture I told myself was just a mother helping her son, but which I knew deep down was a tax I had to pay to keep him in my life. The news of his engagement to Monique Jennings was, on the surface, a joyous occasion. I had met her several times and she was a force of nature, a beautiful, charismatic woman who worked as an assistant to a high-end wedding planner. She moved through the world with a dazzling, almost hypnotic confidence. She had a smile that could disarm a hostile nation and a charm so potent it was almost a physical force. She looked at my son with a fierce, proprietary adoration that seemed to have completely bewitched him. I wanted to be happy for him, for them. I wanted to believe that this was the love that would finally give his life a sense of direction, of purpose. But I, a woman trained to spot the smallest, most subtle signs of distress, could not ignore the warning signs. I saw the way her eyes would glaze over when Andre talked about his students. I saw the faint, almost imperceptible curl of her lip when I mentioned my own modest life. And I saw the way my son seemed to shrink in her presence, his own quiet light dimmed by the blinding glare of her ambition. He was not her partner, he was her project. And I, his mother, was, I feared, nothing more than a potential investor. The wedding planning began almost immediately, and it was here that my vague, formless anxieties began to coalesce into a cold, hard dread. Monique, with her background in the luxury wedding industry, had a vision, and her vision was not a modest, church hall affair. It was a fairy tale, a full-blown, no-expense-spared society page extravaganza that seemed more suited to a royal wedding than to the marriage of a public school teacher and an event planner's assistant. The venue was to be a historic sprawling estate in the heart of Buckhead, a place of manicured gardens and crystal chandeliers that I knew cost a fortune to even look at. The dress was to be couture. The flowers were to be flown in from Holland. The guest list was a sprawling, ever-expanding document of over 200 people. I, a woman who had built her life on the practical, unglamorous arithmetic of a nurse's salary, was quietly, profoundly horrified. André, a teacher, and Monique, an assistant, could not possibly afford this. The numbers simply did not add up. I raised my concerns as gently as I could. One Sunday afternoon, as Monique was showing me a portfolio of floral arrangements that I knew cost more than my first car, we were sitting in the small, tidy living room of the apartment she shared with André, a space that was already beginning to be transformed by her expensive aspirational taste. "This is all so beautiful, Monique," I began, my voice a careful diplomatic murmur, trying to soften the edges of my concern. "You have such wonderful taste, but it all seems awfully expensive. Are you sure you two can manage all this without starting your lives together in a mountain of debt?" Monique's brilliant smile never faltered for a second. She patted my hand, a gesture that was meant to be reassuring but felt strangely, subtly condescending, as if I were a sweet but clueless old woman who simply didn't understand the world of high finance. "Oh, Deborah, don't you worry your pretty little head about that," she said, her voice a silken, dismissive river of charm. "I'm in the industry. I have connections. I know how to get the most amazing deals. Besides," she added, her eyes glittering with a confidence that was almost hypnotic, "André and I believe in manifesting our dreams. You have to go big or go home. You have to project the image of the life you want, not the life you have, and we are not going home." And André, my son, my sensible, grounded son, just beamed, his face a mask of proud, oblivious adoration. He was completely, utterly under her spell. He saw her ambition not as a red flag, a sign of a dangerous disconnect from reality, but as a sign of her passion, her drive. He was not a participant in the planning of his own wedding. He was a happy, willing spectator at the coronation of his queen. I looked at my son, at his kind, honest, and utterly besotted face, and I let it go. What else could I do? To push the issue would be to risk being cast as the villain, the bitter, unsupportive mother-in-law, who was trying to clip her new daughter's beautiful wings. And so I smiled, I nodded, and I watched, with a growing sense of a deep and nameless dread, as my son and his fiancée began to build their beautiful, impossible fairy tale castle on a foundation of pure, unadulterated air. The illusion of family, the one I had so desperately wanted to believe in, was more fragile than I had ever imagined. The month leading up to the wedding was a whirlwind of frantic, expensive activity that consumed my quiet, peaceful retirement. My life was suddenly hijacked by a relentless barrage of bridal showers, dress fittings and cake tastings, each one more extravagant and absurd than the last. Monique was in her element, a beautiful, charismatic general commanding an army of florists, caterers and photographers with a military precision that was both impressive and deeply unsettling. She moved through the world with the confident, unruffled grace of a woman who was born to be in charge, a woman who believed with every fiber of her being that she was owed the very best that life had to offer. But beneath the surface of her perfect, smiling facade, I began to sense a current of something else. A cold, hard, almost desperate ambition that was chilling in its intensity. It was in the way her eyes would dart around a room, assessing, calculating, always searching for a more important person to talk to. It was in the casual, dismissive way she treated the service staff, a stark contrast to the cloying, effusive charm she deployed on the wealthy and the influential. She was a woman who was constantly, relentlessly climbing, and she didn't seem to care who she had to step on to get to the top. The first concrete sign that something was truly terribly wrong came on a Tuesday morning, exactly 4 weeks before the wedding. I had been planning my own small post-retirement celebration, a quiet rebellion against the all-consuming madness of the wedding. It was a 3-week trip to Italy, a lifelong dream that was finally within my reach. I had been saving for it for years, a separate little fund tucked away within my main savings account. A secret personal goal that had nothing to do with my children or their needs. That morning, I went to my local bank, a quiet, friendly neighborhood branch, where I had been a customer for over 30 years, to withdraw the cash for my trip and to purchase the necessary traveler's checks. It was a happy, exciting errand, a final concrete step towards my own personal dream. I sat in the comfortable chair opposite the branch manager's desk, a kind, familiar man named Mr. Henderson, and made my request. He smiled, typed my information into his computer, and then his smile froze. A sudden shocking paralysis that seemed to drain all the warmth from his face. He stared at the screen, his brow furrowed in a confusion that was rapidly turning to alarm. He typed again, his fingers a slow, deliberate staccato as if he were trying to force the numbers on the screen to make sense. He looked from the screen to me, a look of profound, bewildered pity in his eyes, and then back to the screen. "Mrs. Pierce," he said, his voice a low, troubled murmur, a voice that was suddenly stripped of all its earlier professional cheerfulness. "There seems to be a problem." My heart gave a small, anxious lurch. A problem? What kind of problem? A computer glitch? A system error? "The problem?" I asked, my own voice a calm, rational denial of the panic that was beginning to bubble up in my chest. "Is what exactly, Mr. Henderson?" "Your savings account," he said, his eyes still fixed on the screen, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. It's empty." The words did not compute. It was as if he had spoken them in a foreign language, a collection of sounds that had no meaning, no reference point in my reality. Empty? My savings account? The account that held my entire life's work, my security, my future, my trip to Italy? It was a logical, factual impossibility. "There must be some mistake," I said, my voice still calm, still rational, a nurse's voice, trying to impose order on a chaotic, nonsensical situation. "I haven't made any large withdrawals. There should be over $200,000 in that account. Please, check again." Miss Henderson's face was pale, his expression a mixture of professional distress and personal sympathy. He swiveled the computer monitor around to face me, a gesture of sad final proof. "According to our records, Miss Pierce," he said, his voice grave and quiet, "a single online wire transfer was made from this account 1 week ago today. The entire remaining balance, $227,412.58, was transferred to a corporate account." He pointed a trembling finger at the screen. I leaned forward, my eyes struggling to focus on the small black letters, my heart pounding a slow, heavy funeral drum against my ribs. And then I saw the name of the receiving account, and the world tilted on its axis, the solid, reliable floor of my life suddenly giving way to a dark, bottomless abyss. The money had been transferred to a registered LLC, a business I had never heard of, a business with a name that was a declaration of war, a confession, and a death sentence for the family I thought I had. The name of the business was Monique Jennings Wedding and Event Service. The drive to Andre's apartment was a journey through a nightmare. The familiar Atlanta streets, the vibrant green of the trees, the bright, cheerful sunshine, it all seemed like a scene from a movie, a world that was moving on oblivious to the catastrophic personal earthquake that had just leveled my own. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles were white, but I have no memory of the actual mechanics of driving. My mind was a chaotic whirlwind of disbelief, denial, and a terrifying dawning certainty that was so monstrous I could barely let it take shape. Monique, she had done this. She had stolen my entire life's savings to fund her ridiculous, extravagant fantasy wedding with the fruits of my life's labor. She had not just accepted my help, she had plundered my future. But how could she have gotten my account numbers, my passwords, my personal information? The question hung in the air, unanswered, a terrifying mystery. I arrived at their apartment in a state of cold, numb shock. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I had to confront them, to see the truth, or the lie in their eyes. I used my own key to let myself in, my hand trembling so badly I could barely fit it in the lock. The scene that greeted me was one of domestic bliss, a beautiful, fraudulent diorama of a happy family life. They were in the living room, surrounded by a mountain of newly delivered wedding gifts, a bottle of champagne open on the coffee table. They were laughing, a sound of pure, uncomplicated joy that was a brutal physical assault on my shattered heart. They looked up, surprised to see me, and their laughter died, replaced by a sudden awkward silence. My face, I am sure, was a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. I must have looked like a ghost, a specter from a world of consequences that they had foolishly believed they could escape. Andre was on his feet in an instant, his kind, handsome face a picture of genuine concern. "Mom, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." But before I could speak, before I could unleash the torrent of accusations, the ugly, damning truth that was choking me, Monique enacted the most brilliant, most diabolical performance of her young predatory life. Her face, which had for a split second held a flicker of pure animal panic, transformed itself into a mask of radiant, tearful joy. She let out a small, theatrical gasp, her hands flying to her mouth in a gesture of perfect practiced surprise. "Oh, my God," she whispered, her voice a perfect symphony of awe and gratitude, every note flawlessly executed. "You found out? Oh, Deborah. I wanted to tell you, to thank you properly, but you were so quiet about it, so humble. We didn't know what to say." She rushed towards me, her arms outstretched, and enveloped me in a hug that felt like a cage of snakes. "Oh, Deborah," she breathed, her voice thick with a perfectly feigned emotion that was so convincing it was almost a work of art. "We are speechless. Absolutely, utterly speechless. Your gift, it's the most generous, most incredible thing anyone has ever done for us. You've made my dream, our dream, a reality. How can we ever thank you enough?" I stood there, frozen in her embrace, my body rigid, my mind reeling from the sheer breathtaking audacity of her lie. A gift. She had stolen every penny I had in the world, and she was framing it as a gift. It was a move of such stunning sociopathic genius that I was momentarily paralyzed, unable to speak, to move, to even think. It was a checkmate of the highest, most diabolical order, and my son, my good, kind, and hopelessly naive son, was completely, utterly duped. He saw the tears in his fiancée's beautiful eyes, he heard the trembling gratitude in her voice, and he believed, of course he believed. He wanted to believe. He rushed forward, and joined the hug, his own strong arms wrapping around both of us, his face a picture of pure, unadulterated joy and relief. "Mom," he said, his own voice thick with tears of genuine heartfelt gratitude. I don't know what to say. I saw the bank transfer notification on our joint account this morning, but I thought it was a mistake. You paid for the whole wedding. You gave us our dream. I can't believe it. You're the most generous, most wonderful mother in the world." And there it was, the perfect crime. She had not just stolen my money, she had stolen my voice, she had stolen my very reality, replacing it with a beautiful glittering lie that my own son had accepted as the gospel truth. To deny it now would be to cast myself as the villain, the cruel, vindictive mother who was trying to take back a gift, to ruin her own son's happiness. They had not just robbed me, they had silenced me. I was trapped, utterly, completely, and brilliantly trapped in the web of their beautiful, monstrous lie. I extricated myself from their suffocating embrace, my body feeling cold and numb, my mind a chaotic storm of conflicting impulses. To scream the truth would be to destroy my son's happiness, to shatter his beautiful, innocent love for this monster he was about to marry. But to remain silent would be to condone their crime, to become a willing, silent accomplice in my own destruction. I needed to talk to my son alone. I needed to get him away from the hypnotic, venomous charm of his fiancée. I mumbled something about needing a glass of water, a feeble excuse to get away from the suffocating atmosphere of the living room. Monique, ever the gracious hostess, offered to get it for me, but I insisted, my voice a little too sharp. "No," I said, "I'll get it." "Andre, can you come with me for a moment? I want to ask you about the seating chart." It was a clumsy, transparent pretext, but it was the best I could do. Monique's eyes narrowed for a fraction of a second, a flicker of suspicion in their dark, beautiful depths, but she just smiled her brilliant, dazzling smile. "Of course," she said. "You two go ahead. I'll just be here admiring our new crystal." The last word was a small, triumphant little twist of the knife. I led Andre into the small galley kitchen, the silence between us thick and heavy. I closed the door behind us, a flimsy barrier against the powerful, corrupting force in the other room. I turned to face my son, my heart a raw, open wound. I had to try to break the spell she had cast over him. "Andre," I began, my voice a low, pleading whisper, "we need to talk about the money. You have to listen to me. I did not give you that money. I did not give Monique that money. It was stolen." I watched his face, praying for a flicker of understanding, a glimmer of doubt, but there was nothing. His expression, which had been one of pure, uncomplicated joy, was now clouding over with a look of confusion and a dawning, terrible disappointment. But the disappointment was not directed at his fiancée, it was directed at me. "Mom," he said, his voice a low, warning tone, "what are you talking about? We just thanked you. It was the most incredible gift anyone has ever given us. Don't ruin this." "Ruin this?" I asked, my own voice rising with a note of incredulous hysteria. "Andre, she stole my life savings. She emptied my entire bank account. That was my retirement, my future. That was 40 years of my life. He shook his head, a look of profound pitying sadness on his face, as if I were a confused senile old woman, a difficult relative who was having a momentary paranoid episode. Mom, I know you've been lonely since Dad died, he said, his voice the gentle placating tone one uses with the mentally ill. And I know all this wedding stuff has been a lot for you, but you can't just change your mind about a gift like this. It's not fair. Monique, she's been working so hard. This wedding is everything to her. His words were a series of small sharp blows to my heart. He wasn't just disbelieving me, he was diagnosing me. He was siding with her beautiful glittering lie, against his own mother's ugly inconvenient truth. He was choosing the fantasy over the reality, and then he delivered the final killing blow. The words that would echo in my mind forever. The words that finally irrevocably severed the last frayed thread of our bond. He took my hands in his grip surprisingly firm, his eyes looking directly into mine, not with love but with a cold heart and utterly final resolve. Mom, he said, his voice a low chilling command. What is your problem? You have all that money just sitting there. You weren't even using it. Stop being so selfish. This is the happiest I have ever been. For once in your life, stop thinking about yourself. Just be happy for us. Us. The word was a final brutal twist of the knife. It was no longer him and me against the world. It was him and her against me. I pulled my hands from his grasp as if I had been burned. I looked at my son, at this stranger wearing his face, and I saw not a hint of the kind, gentle boy I had raised. I saw only a weak, foolish man who had become a willing, happy accomplice in his own mother's destruction. I drove home from my son's apartment in a state of cold, numb shock. The world outside my car window seemed to be moving in slow motion. The familiar, vibrant streets of Atlanta rendered in a dull, muted gray. The pain of my son's betrayal was so profound, so absolute, that it had moved beyond the realm of mere emotion. It was a physical state, a cold, heavy and permanent alteration of my own personal chemistry. The love I had felt for him, a force that had been the sun in my own personal solar system for over 30 years, had been extinguished, leaving behind a dark, cold and empty void. I returned to my small, quiet bungalow, the silence of the house no longer a comfort but a mocking echo of my own profound isolation. I was utterly, completely alone. I had no other children, my husband was gone, and my only son, my pride and my joy, had just looked me in the eye and called me selfish for wanting to keep my own hard-earned life savings. He had not just chosen his fiancée over me, he had chosen her crime over my truth. He had become a willing, happy participant in my destruction. I sat in the darkness of my living room for a long time, the ghosts of the life I thought I had flitting through the shadows. I saw Andre as a little boy, his face full of a sweet, uncomplicated love for his mother. A love that I now saw was as fragile and as fleeting as a summer cloud. I saw the man he had become, a weak, foolish man who had allowed himself to be so completely bewitched by a beautiful, predatory woman that he had sacrificed his own mother on the altar of her greed. The grief was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it difficult to breathe. But as the hours of the night wore on, as the first faint gray light of dawn began to creep through the blinds, a new, unfamiliar feeling began to smolder in the cold, dead ashes of my heart. It was rage, a quiet, focused and utterly determined rage. And in that moment something inside me, something that had been soft and yielding and endlessly forgiving, finally hardened into a core of pure, unshakable steel. The grieving, heartbroken mother was gone, and in her place, the cool, methodical and relentlessly determined NICU nurse, the woman who had spent her life fighting impossible battles and winning them, began to emerge from the wreckage. I had spent my life in a state of quiet, competent control. In the NICU I had been the calm center of a storm of life and death emergencies. I had managed complex medication schedules, performed delicate procedures, and made split-second decisions that had saved countless fragile lives. I was a woman of science, of evidence, of procedure. I was a woman who did not tolerate mistakes, who did not suffer fools, who did not, under any circumstances, give up. And I realized with a jolt of grim, empowering certainty that this was not a family drama. This was a crime scene, and I was the only one who could process the evidence. The shift in my perspective was immediate and profound. The fog of my grief began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard and utterly liberating clarity. My objective was no longer to win back my son's love, which I now knew was a lost cause. My objective was to win back my life. And to do that, I needed to build a case so airtight, so irrefutable, that it would not just expose their lie, but would utterly, completely and publicly annihilate it. My son had told me to be happy for them, and I decided in the cold, quiet light of that new day, that I would be happy to attend their wedding. And I would be bringing a gift of my own, a gift of pure, unadulterated and legally binding justice. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. The house was still quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It was the quiet of a laboratory, of a research facility, of a war room. I showered, dressed in a sharp, professional outfit, and did my hair and makeup with a meticulous precision I hadn't bothered with in years. I was no longer a grieving widow or a lonely mother. I was a clinical investigator, and my subject was the criminal conspiracy that had been perpetrated against me by my own son and his fiancée. I began by assembling my evidence. I gathered every bank statement, every financial document I could find. I created a timeline, a precise chronological account of the events leading up to the theft. I wrote down verbatim the words my son had spoken to me in his kitchen, the cruel gaslighting phrases that were in their own way as damning as any forged signature. I was building a dossier, a comprehensive, evidence-based narrative of their crime. I was no longer a participant in their drama. I was the author of their downfall. My next step was to seek a professional alliance. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed the weight of the law on my side. I spent the morning researching the best financial crimes units in the Atlanta Police Department. I made a phone call, my voice calm, clear, and authoritative, and I scheduled an appointment. That afternoon I walked into the downtown Atlanta precinct, my binder of evidence clutched in my hand like a shield. The air inside was thick with the smell of stale coffee and a kind of weary institutional despair. I felt small and out of place, a respectable law-abiding citizen in a world of chaos and crime, but I did not allow myself to be intimidated. I was on a mission. I was led to a small, cluttered office where I met Detective Isabella Wright. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 40s, with intelligent, weary eyes that had clearly seen the worst of human nature. Her desk was piled high with files, each one I imagined a story of betrayal and greed not so different from my own. I had expected to be dismissed, to be told this was a civil matter, a family dispute. I had steeled myself for a long, frustrating battle to be taken seriously, but I had underestimated Detective Wright. She listened. For over an hour, she listened with a quiet, focused intensity as I laid out my story, my voice not emotional but calm, factual, and precise, the voice of a nurse delivering a critical patient report. I did not weep. I did not rage. I simply presented the facts. I walked her through the evidence, the bank statement showing the massive, unauthorized wire transfer, the corporate registration for Monique Jennings' Wedding and Event Services, which listed Monique as the sole proprietor, my own detailed financial records, proving that the sum in question was indeed my entire life's savings. I even told her about my son's words, his cruel dismissive command to stop being so selfish. I was not a hysterical old woman. I was a credible witness, presenting a clear evidence-based case of elder financial abuse, wire fraud, and conspiracy. When I was finished, Detective Wright was silent for a long moment. She looked from the binder of evidence to my face, and I saw a flicker of something in her tired, intelligent eyes, a look of profound, professional respect, mixed with a quiet, righteous anger. "Mrs. Pierce," she said, her voice a low, grim murmur, that held not a trace of doubt, "I am very, very sorry for what you have been through, and I want you to know with 100% certainty, that I believe you." The words were a balm to my raw, wounded soul. To be seen, to be believed, after being so profoundly gaslighted by my own family, was a gift of almost unimaginable grace. It was the first solid ground I had stood on since my world had collapsed. Detective Wright then explained the process. She would open an official investigation immediately. She would subpoena the full bank records for both my account and Monique's corporate account. She would trace the IP address from which the wire transfer had been initiated. She would build a case. But she warned me that it would take time. The wheels of justice, she explained, grind slowly. The wedding was in 3 weeks. They will likely be arrested before then, she said. We have more than enough here to move forward with charges. But I can't make any promises about the exact timing. And in that moment, as she spoke of arrests and charges, a new, audacious, and utterly terrifying idea began to form in my mind. An arrest before the wedding would be justice, but an arrest at the wedding, that would be a reckoning. "Detective," I said, my voice a low, steady command, my heart pounding with the sheer, breathtaking audacity of my own idea. "I have a request, a rather unusual one." She looked at me, her expression a mixture of curiosity and professional caution. "I'm listening," she said. "I don't want you to arrest them before the wedding," I said, the words feeling strange and powerful on my tongue. "I want you to wait. I want you to wait for the ceremony itself." Detective Wright's eyebrows shot up in surprise. She leaned forward, a slow knowing smile spreading across her face. She had seen my pain, my humiliation. She had understood the profound personal nature of this particular crime. And in that moment she was not just a police officer, she was an ally, an instrument of a justice that was not just legal but poetic. "Mrs. Pierce," she said, a glint of pure unadulterated steel in her eyes, a look of profound professional appreciation for the sheer theatrical brilliance of my plan. "I think that can be arranged." We spent the next hour planning the operation with the meticulous, strategic precision of two generals planning a D-Day invasion. We chose the moment, the signal, the exact dramatic sequence of events. We were no longer just building a legal case. We were writing the final explosive scene of a play that would bring the house down. The 3 weeks leading up to the wedding were the longest, most surreal of my life. I was living a double life, a spy in the enemy camp of my own family. On the surface I was the proud supportive mother of the groom, playing my part in their grand fraudulent production with an Oscar-worthy performance of maternal devotion. I had to field their phone calls, their breathless excited updates about the wedding plans, all of which I knew were being funded by my stolen life. Monique would call, her voice a silken triumphant purr, to tell me about the 5-tiered wedding cake she had ordered, or the famous band she had booked for the reception. "It's all coming together so perfectly, Deborah," she would gush. "It's like a dream come true, and we have you to thank for it." I would murmur my approval, my own voice a carefully constructed mask of warmth and generosity, while a cold, hard knot of rage tightened in my stomach. Andre would call, his voice full of a genuine boyish excitement that was almost more painful to listen to than Monique's lies. He was so happy, so utterly, completely duped, that a part of me, the old foolish mother part, almost felt a pang of guilt for the reckoning that was to come. But then I would remember his words in the kitchen, his cold, dismissive command to stop being so selfish, and my resolve would harden like steel. I attended the final dress fitting, my face a carefully constructed mask of maternal pride, as Monique twirled in a gown that had been purchased with my stolen life savings. It was a beautiful dress, a cloud of silk and lace, and it looked grotesque on her, a beautiful glittering shroud for a rotten, decaying soul. I smiled and told her she was the most beautiful bride I had ever seen. And as I spoke the words, a small cold part of my mind was imagining how the white silk would look with a pair of steel handcuffs. I sat through the rehearsal dinner, a lavish, expensive affair at a Buckhead restaurant, and I listened to the gushing, heartfelt toasts to the happy couple. I listened as my own son, my dear foolish Andre, stood up and spoke of Monique's generous, loving spirit, of her unshakable integrity, and I had to physically grip the edge of the table to keep from screaming. I smiled, I nodded, I played the part of the happy, generous matriarch to perfection. No one, least of all my own son, suspected a thing. They saw my quiet, withdrawn demeanor as a sign of my grudging acceptance, of my final inevitable surrender to their will. They mistook my silence for weakness. They had no idea that my silence was a countdown. Meanwhile, in the secret hidden world of my new life, the investigation was proceeding with a swift, silent efficiency. Detective Wright would call me with quiet, coded updates. Our conversations, the clandestine communications of two co-conspirators. The subpoenas had been served. The bank records had confirmed everything I had claimed. The wire transfer had, as I had suspected, been initiated from a laptop at an IP address registered to my son and Monique's shared apartment. A piece of evidence that directly implicated them both in the conspiracy. The case was a fortress. The evidence was irrefutable. All that was left was to choose the moment to strike. A moment that was now just days away. The final terrible test of my resolve came 3 days before the wedding. Andre called me, his voice full of a genuine boyish excitement. He was calling to ask me a favor. Monique's father was not in the picture, and she had no one to walk her down the aisle. She had asked if Andre, would meet her at the back of the chapel and walk with her. And she had asked if his mother, would walk him down the aisle first. "She wants to join our family, Mom," he said, his voice thick with an emotion that was so genuine it almost broke my heart. "She wants to honor you. Will you do it? Will you walk me down the aisle?" The request was a masterstroke of manipulation, a final brilliant move by Monique to solidify her image as the loving, inclusive daughter-in-law. It was also a test. To refuse would be to seem petty, to cast a shadow over their perfect day. I knew I had to say yes. and so I did. I agreed to walk my own son down the aisle, to deliver him into the hands of the woman who had robbed me. A final terrible and necessary act of deception before the curtain rose on my own final and devastating performance. The wedding day arrived, a perfect sun-drenched Saturday in late October. The historic Buckhead estate was a picture of extravagant, breathtaking beauty, a monument to my own stolen life's work. The gardens were overflowing with thousands of white roses, their scent a sweet, cloying perfume that seemed to mock the ugliness of the crime that had paid for them. The air was filled with the sound of a string quartet, their beautiful soaring music a soundtrack to a lie. Waiters in crisp white jackets moved among the 200 guests, carrying trays of champagne and delicate expensive hors d'oeuvres. It was a scene of such perfect opulent joy that it felt like a personal mocking insult. Every flower, every glass of champagne, every note of music was a testament to their theft. Monique was radiant. She was a vision in her couture gown, a frothy cloud of silk and hand-sewn pearls, a diamond necklace that I knew had cost more than my car glittering at her throat. She was the queen of her own, stolen kingdom, and she was reveling in every moment of it. She greeted me at the chapel door with a hug, her smile a brilliant, dazzling display of perfect white teeth. "Thank you for doing this, Deborah," she whispered, her voice a perfect symphony of gratitude. "It means the world to us." I smiled back, a cold, hard, and utterly convincing smile of my own. "It's my pleasure, dear," I said. The daughter I no longer had, Angela, was not present. In a rare stroke of luck, a warrant for her arrest in connection with a separate, earlier fraud case had been issued the day before. Detective Wright had quietly arranged for her to be picked up that morning, ensuring she would not be at the wedding to create a secondary scene or to warn her co-conspirator. My son, my poor, foolish, beautiful son, stood at the altar, his face glowing with a love so pure, so genuine that it broke my heart all over again. He was the only innocent in this entire sordid affair, a good man who had been so blinded by love that he could not see the viper he was about to take as his wife. I sat in the front pew, dressed in a simple, elegant suit of deep, unforgiving navy blue. I was not the mother of the groom. I was a Trojan horse, a secret hidden army of one, waiting for the signal to open the gates and let justice pour in. The ceremony began. The music swelled. The guests, a collection of Atlanta's finest, murmured in appreciation at the sheer breathtaking beauty of it all. And then, the moment came. The officiant, a man with a kind, gentle face, smiled at the happy couple, who were now standing hand in hand before him. He spoke of love, of trust, of the sanctity of marriage, and then, he reached the final fateful lines of the ceremony. He turned to the assembled guests. "And now," he said, his voice a warm, resonant baritone, "if there is anyone here who can show just cause why these two should not be joined together in holy matrimony, let them speak now, or forever hold their peace." It was a traditional rhetorical question, a moment of polite, expected silence, a moment that I was about to fill with a truth so loud, so explosive, that it would bring this entire fraudulent temple crashing down. The officiant's words, "Speak now or forever hold your peace," hung in the warm sun-drenched air, a formal final invitation. The 200 guests, as expected, remained silent, their faces a sea of beatific smiling approval. The string quartet held a long dramatic chord, waiting for the officiant's cue to begin the triumphant recessional. Monique turned her radiant smiling face to André, a look of pure unadulterated triumph in her eyes. She had done it. She had pulled off the perfect crime, and her reward was this perfect stolen day. But the silence was broken. Not by me, not yet. It was broken by the sound of the grand oak double doors at the back of the open-air chapel, swinging open with a slow, deliberate, and undeniable authority. Every head in the congregation turned, a collective, rustling wave of curiosity and surprise. The string quartet confused, faltered, the beautiful soaring chord dying in a flurry of discordant notes, and into that sudden, profound silence, the uninvited guests arrived. First came 2 uniformed Atlanta police officers, their presence in this temple of love and luxury a shocking, surreal intrusion. They did not look angry or aggressive. They looked calm, professional, and utterly implacable. And behind them, walking with the quiet, unshakable confidence of a woman who held all the cards, was Detective Isabella Wright. She was not in uniform. She was dressed in a sharp, dark pantsuit, her badge clipped to her belt, a clear, official-looking folder in her hand. A wave of stunned, horrified disbelief washed over the faces of the guests. A low, panicked murmur rippled through the crowd. I saw my son's face, his expression of pure uncomplicated joy crumbling into a mask of pale, terrified confusion. He looked at me, a silent, pleading question in his eyes, but I did not meet his gaze, and I saw Monique's beautiful, radiant face contort into a snarl of pure, unadulterated hatred. The game was over. The trap had been sprung. I stood up. My movement was slow, deliberate, and in the dead silent chapel it was as loud as a gunshot. I smoothed the lines of my navy blue suit, a quiet, unconscious gesture of a woman preparing for battle. And then, I began to walk. I walked with a slow, steady and resolute pace down the long, petal-strewn aisle. My sensible, low-heeled shoes made a soft, rhythmic clicking sound on the stone floor. A quiet, inexorable drumbeat of a reckoning long overdue. I did not look at the stunned, whispering guests who craned their necks to get a better look at the unfolding drama. I looked only at my son. I walked until I was standing directly in front of the altar, directly in front of the man I had raised, the man whose life was about to be irrevocably shattered. I stopped, and in the ringing absolute silence that now held the entire congregation in its grip, I held up my hand, not in anger but as if to ask for permission to speak. The poor, bewildered officiant, who looked as if he were about to faint, just stared at me, his mouth agape. So I spoke. "I have a reason," I announced, my voice not a shout, but a clear, steady and carrying statement of fact that echoed through the silent, sun-drenched chapel. "I have just cause." I then turned to my son, my poor, blind, beautiful son, and I held out the thick manila folder that Detective Wright had just handed to me. "I believe you'll want to see this," Andre said, my voice softening with a flicker of the old, maternal love that I knew would never truly die, a love that was now mixed with a profound, aching pity. "It's the bank statements, and the police report." He took the folder from my hand, his own trembling so badly he could barely hold it. He opened it, his eyes scanning the top page, the page that showed the single massive wire transfer that had emptied my savings account. He looked from the paper to Monique, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrified comprehension. And in that moment, the beautiful glittering lie that she had so carefully constructed around him shattered into a million irreparable pieces. He finally saw her, not as the beautiful, ambitious angel he had fallen in love with, but as the cold, calculating thief she truly was. But the final devastating act of this drama did not belong to me. It belonged to the law. Detective Isabella Wright stepped forward, her movements crisp and professional, her voice a calm, dispassionate instrument of justice. She stopped in front of the altar, in front of the bride, who was now standing frozen, her face a mask of pure impotent rage. "Monique Jennings," Detective Wright said, her voice clear and strong cutting through the stunned silence, "you are under arrest for wire fraud, theft by conversion and financial elder abuse." The collective gasp of the 200 guests was a hurricane of sound. Monique let out a strangled, hysterical shriek, a sound that was half rage, half terror. "This is a lie," she screamed, her voice a shrill, ugly thing that bore no resemblance to the silken, charming tones she usually employed. "It was a gift. She gave it to me. Tell them, Andre. Tell them it was a gift." But Andre was not looking at her. He was staring at the bank statements in his hand, his face a pale, ghostly mask of a grief, so profound it was beyond words. He had been a fool, a pawn in a game he hadn't even known. He was playing. His perfect fairy tale wedding was a sham. His perfect fairy tale bride, a monster. The dream wedding had imploded into a scene of public catastrophic humiliation. The two uniformed officers stepped forward, their movements efficient and impersonal. They took Monique's arms, which were still clutching a ridiculously oversized bouquet of expensive imported roses, and pulled them behind her back. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs snapping shut was the only sound in the chapel. It was a sound of finality, of a debt finally being paid. The beautiful couture wedding gown, a symbol of her stolen triumph, was now a prisoner's uniform. As they led her away, a screaming, weeping, pathetic caricature of the queen she had so desperately wanted to be, I looked at my son. He stood alone at the altar, the wedding guests whispering and pointing, their sympathy replaced by a morbid, scandalized curiosity. He was a man whose life had been utterly, completely destroyed in the space of 5 minutes. His bride was a felon. His own mother had been the one to expose her. His future was a wasteland. And I, Deborah Pierce, stood tall. I had lost a son. In a way, I had certainly lost the naive, uncomplicated love I once had for him. But in that moment of terrible public and necessary destruction, had reclaimed something far more valuable. I had reclaimed my life. I had reclaimed my dignity. I had reclaimed my truth. The only thing Monique Jennings had gotten on her wedding day was a pair of cold, hard, and legally binding steel bracelets. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt a sense of profound and utter peace. Now, I'm curious about you who have listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and fighting for the truth? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching.